but we will also allow people to make their own conclusions after they observe our attempt at verifying this flat Earth claim.
That's great how you can pull up other people's YouTube videos, but you couldn't pull up mine. I'm currently traveling, and I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, hanging out with some flat earthers. That's pretty much all I do is travel the country, but I don't have access to a YouTube that I can show everyone. But if I did, I'd direct you to my cold moonlight experiment, which is noticeably different than your cold moonlight experiment where you couldn't detect. Hey, I just welcome all the listeners. Go grab a $20 laser thermometer, test it for yourself. What's the worst that can happen?
Well,
Shoot me the results.
I will put your video. Once this is done, I'll put your link in there as well, Nathan. And then I would ask that people that want to do this experiment do so by both methodology.
Cool.
They can do it by Astronomy Live's method, your method, and then see for themselves if there's such a thing as cold light. I also would like to see more of a documentation for my own personal thing. I would read upon that from a physics standpoint.
Yeah, and just for your information, Kyle, if you magnify the light from the moon, you'll never get an increase in temperature, not even by 1 degree. So if the moonlight is in fact sunlight, they have these giant lenses that are 36 inches in diameter, and you have to hold it 4 feet above the ground. You can concentrate all the light from the sun or the moon into one point. It never increases 1 degree. I don't know if you want to go through more questions from the live feed.
Well,
but
you
I want
asked
to
your
know.
Question, then Nathan, and then so Reds has his, and I have one more question from the live feed. So, Reds, you want to ask a specific question towards him?
Sure. So my question to you is, please explain to me how an equatorial mount works on a flat Earth.
Reds, I don't know anything about an equatorial mount, so I can't help you there. I want to know. I got a question. If I can ask a question.
Hey, can I just ask a different question since you don't know anything about equatorial mounts?
Yeah, that's cool. Fair. Cool. Yeah, please.
I mean, I think I deserve at least one answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, ask as many questions you want, Red. I'm here to chat with you, bro. If you have questions, that's great. I mean, it's really honestly better than hearing you regurgitate crap I've already heard, because I've heard all those proofs.
The feeling is mutual, which is why I was bringing up videos I made that answer your questions back from 2015. So my question is that if you're going to talk about, like, let's say the law of perspective and stuff like that, is there any numbers to your definition of perspective or no?
Yeah, I'm sure there are numbers. I'm just,
But you don't know what they are?
No, I don't have the numbers for perspective in front of me.
Okay. Do you utilize those numbers for perspective when you're doing your observations or no? Or do you find them unneeded?
I don't know what you need numbers for to determine what you're seeing, because you can clearly see that things are flat, and you can clearly see that the sun disappears behind the horizon, and it actually has a green flash, which, if you understand prisms, I don't know if you understand prisms, Red. The green flash on a sun proves the sun is still above the horizon. It's just really far away, because if the sun were dipping below the horizon, the green flash would actually appear flipped on the bottom of the sun. So have you ever heard a green flash argument, Red, or is that all new to you?
I think it's time for me to ask questions, but just so I can sum up your answer here, your answer is no, I don't use numbers when referring to perspective. I find them unnecessary. Is that fair to say?
No, not at all, because you're calculating sight distances. Numbers are all very important. I just don't understand what you're saying about the perspective formula. What can you elaborate on that for me?
What the law of perspective is?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, what am I missing here?
Well, I'm not saying you're missing anything. I'm actually trying to determine if you're missing anything based on your answer.
Okay, well, what should I be using in my experiments regarding perspective?
Okay, well, here's the thing. I'm asking you if you do use anything. If the answer is no, then that answers my question. So I guess I should.
Do. No, I do. I use your alleged curvature formula. I use distances from the observer. I use height of the observer. I mean, we've been going over numbers all day. To think I'm just talking
about one thing here. I'm just talking about one thing. Let me rephrase the question or repeat the question. When you are referring to the law of perspective, just the law of perspective, what formula, if any, do you use?
Oh, I don't know. I don't understand the question. I'm sorry, Red.
Let me see if I can facilitate this. Then he's asking you for an actual formula that you can show us that you're using for your evaluation of your experiments relation.
Yeah, of course.
Perspective.
The alleged curvature formula of the ball Earth is 8 inches per mile squared. So if you can see things that are alleged to be behind the Earth's curvature formula,
that's not his question.
I mean, I don't understand.
He's asking.
That's not my question.
There's various formulas that you use in optics, and there is things relating to perspective, especially doing with isomorphic transformations and matrix. But he's asking you which one of those formulas are you using to?
I don't even know what an isomorphic transformation is, Kyle. I'm sorry.
So I'm Steve, but that's okay. People get us confused all the time. We're so much alike. So I'm trying to rephrase this in a way that, again, that Reg is asking it in a way that the audience can understand as far as perspective. He's just asking you what formula are you using? He's asking for numbers.
I'm using the purported globe Earth formula, 24,901 miles around, to see distances
that's not a formula,
that should be behind a curve.
That's a figure, not a formula, and that's revolving around curvature, not perspective. Let me try this again, but let me break it up, okay?
Please do.
Okay, so I'm going to try to ask this in a different way. For the definition of perspective, do you define perspective as a mathematical formula or not?
Perspective is how things disappear as they move away from you. I'm sure there's a mathematical calculation for it, just like there's a mathematical calculation for everything in the universe we observe, except for this globe Earth purported numbers that we've been going over. So
I'm going to ask you to stay on topic here. So to answer my second question then, when you are referring to perspective, or when you go out and do observations where perspective is important, you do not take into account any formulas in your observation.
What perspective formula should I be taking into account, Red?
Alpha equals 2 times the arctan of G over 2R, where alpha is the angular size of the object, G is the actual size of the object, and R is the distance to the object.
Cool, sounds good. Never heard of the formula.
Never heard of it. Actually, that answers my question very well, actually. Perfect. We can move on.
Glad you questioned.
Hey, Red, I got a question. I got a question for Red.
Okay.
So all these
Wasn't
thousands.
It supposed to be from the chat?
Yeah. Well, let me do a quick follow up. It's okay. Make it a very quick question.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So we're
quick question.
The ball Earth's alleged to have thousands of satellites, and you go and record these launches all the time. And I'm just wondering, what are all these satellites? And of course, they're attracted to Earth because of gravity. And that's how that all works. They go 17,000 miles an hour. But what are you guys doing during meteor showers, bro? You guys just take all the satellites down, or are they calculating for meteor showers decades in advance with these satellites and where all the rocks are going to be?
So what exactly is your question?
Yeah,
your question is
what are they doing with satellites during meteor showers?
Okay, so
do they calculate for all this movement in space dozens of years in advance before they send the satellites out, and before Elon sent this car on a billion-year orbit?
His question assuming that these things get struck by meteor showers. I think that's his question.
Are we talking about like space debris?
Satellite.
Meteor showers would be like space debris, yes.
Okay. So here's the thing. Satellites are basically a certain size, and also the sphere of influence around the Earth is also a certain size. What is the percentage of area that satellite takes up? A pretty minute amount. If a rock is going to be, if it's equally probable that a rock or a piece of space debris or space junk or whatever is going to be entering that sphere of influence, it is more likely that it will not hit anything rather than more likely that it will hit something. Now, it's not to say that objects haven't been hit by meteors in the past. We have pictures of solar panels actually getting bashed to shit by space debris. In fact, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter actually recorded itself being hit by something. You can even hear a little ding when it happened on its onboard recorder. So yes, objects are in space. There are satellites that are in space, and there is a risk with putting objects in space given space debris. But the chances of being hit by something are not so astronomical that it is impossible for satellites to be up there for days, years, or even decades at a fucking time without being hit by something.
So your answer is space is big.
My answer is that space is big. Satellites are small.
Okay.
So they just don't factor it in. Got you. All right, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks, Red.
I think
Cool.
what he's basically saying is that space. There's a lot of area around space, and the amount of area that satellites take up in proportion in relationship to that is very, very small and minute. They do get struck, but it's not a very regular occurrence.
Yes,
So
correct.
while they send these satellites into space, they're calculating for the gravitational pull of the Earth, the gravitational pull of the Moon, and the gravitational pull of the Sun on all these different satellites and their orbits, and just saying, they take up so much space, and space is so big that they won't get hit by rocks. But they do sometimes. But what I don't understand is these satellites that get hit by rocks, isn't that going to send 100 satellite shrapnel into orbit? And isn't that going to cause a very big problem for all the other satellites that are in orbit? Because
most meteors are about the size of a grain of sand.
Okay, but you hit something going 17,000 miles an hour. I don't care the size of that object. It's going to, and so you're telling me that going 17,000 miles an hour and hitting a grain of sand isn't going to completely demolish a satellite?
Well, we could
actually, that's exactly what I'm going to say. No, it won't completely demolish the satellite because kinetic energy values are a thing.
Okay, well, thanks for your answer, Red.
And kinetic.
Thank you.
Can you explain for the audience, if you will, the relationship of kinetic energy to mass and using kinetic energy formula, so they have an idea of why a speck of dust or sand is not going to impart too much energy on a collision?
Yeah,
kinetic dust.
Kinetic energy equals 1/2 of m times v to the second. M would be the mass of the object, and v would be the velocity. If the object is, has a very light mass, m, once you decrease m, you also decrease e as a consequence of that. So a grain of sand is going to have very little energy to actually transfer to the satellite to cause damage. The mass would have to be a certain value. The velocity would have to be a certain value in order to go past the structural integrity or the tolerances of the satellites that are in orbit in order for it to actually do anything. And with it being just a grain of sand or dust or whatever, it hitting something, it simply doesn't have enough energy to transfer to the object to cause damage to that object.
Okay, thank you very much.
Assuming they're all the size of a grain of sand. Okay, got it. Cool.
Which we never said they were, but,
Just many and most of them are. Okay, so the next question is
Yes,
by an actual astronomer. He says, why does the rate of the Foucault pendulum depend on the latitude of the observer? And either one of you can take this.
That's called petitio principi. He's begging the question. I've never seen proof that a Foucault pendulum is dependent upon the latitude that it's installed at. But what I do want to know is why nothing hanging swings all over the place if that's such a great proof of Earth's movement. And also, who starts the Foucault pendulum? And also, how do they explain an Elias effect? Because a Foucault doesn't work during eclipse. And, eclipse doesn't have anything to do with Earth's movement. So just wondering if you could touch on that for me.
Reg, you want to touch on that then?
Well, answer the question that was asked by the audience?
Yes, please, first, yes.
Okay, then I'll start with that. Foucault's pendulum, basically, an oversimplified view would be to bring the pendulum to the top of the axis, so the North Pole. So if you're at the North Pole and you let go of the pendulum, as the pendulum swings from back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, the Earth is going to rotate underneath it. So for somebody that is actually on the Earth, it's going to look like it changes the direction of its precession. So eventually, in a 24-hour period, it will spin that precession round one time. As you get away from the pole, it's going to change it to a certain limit. So you'll see it dip this far, and then you'll see it dip that far in the other direction by a certain degree. And that is dependent on your position to the Earth. The best way to explain it would be to look at a model of it actually in practice. In fact, you can build one of these yourself. I did in high school, and it worked out just fine. And to answer the question of how you actually start one of these damn things without introducing any biases, I will say it is rather difficult, but notice the word difficult instead of the word impossible. The way people usually do is that they simply tie it to an anchor point and burn the string off, thus not actually introducing any side-to-side motion that would influence the result.
Well, something I got that completely throws that on its head is a gimbal base from a gyroscope placed on a table shows no movement for the spin of the Earth. If the Earth were spinning, the gimbal surrounding a gyroscope would show a movement of 1.25 degrees every 5 minutes and 15 degrees every hour. So such an experiment has been performed, and it's never shown. Have you ever heard of a gimbal base and a gyroscope